The letter in Hannah's apron pocket felt heavy, like a stone that could sink her soul. She knew she shouldn't have picked it up. She knew she shouldn't have looked at him when he walked into the meeting house. His clothes still smelling of the city, and his eyes full of shadows. Caleb wasn't just a boy who had left the Amish faith. He was the one who broke her heart 3 years ago. Now he was back, limping and silent. And the bishop had warned everyone to keep their distance. But as the rain began to drum against the roof of the buggy, Hannah made a choice that would change everything. She unfolded the paper. The morning mist clung to the rolling hills of Holmes County, Ohio, like a soft, woolen blanket that refused to be shaken off. It was that gray, quiet hour just before the sun breaks the horizon, the time when the world feels suspended between dreams and the day's labor. In the Stoltzfus farmhouse, the silence was broken only by the rhythmic thump-thump of dough being kneaded against a wooden board. Hannah Stoltzfus pushed the heels of her hands into the sourdough, her arms strong from years of milking and lifting. The kitchen smelled of yeast, wood smoke, and the sharp, earthy scent of dried sage hanging from the rafters. She was 21 years old, with eyes the color of the creek water after a storm gray, deep and reflective. She moved with the efficiency of a woman who knew her place in the world and found comfort in it. To be plain was to be peaceful. That is what her mangame always said. A simple life meant a quiet heart. But this morning, Hannah's heart was not quiet. It was fluttering like a bird trapped in a hayloft. Today was market day in town. But more importantly, it was the first Sunday after the fall harvest, the time when the wayward children sometimes returned from their rooms. "Hannah!" Her mother's voice was soft, coming from the doorway. Sarah Stoltzfus adjusted her prayer covering, her face lined with the gentle weariness of a life spent serving others. "The bread must rise. Go and hitch the mare. Your dad is already at the barn." Hannah nodded, wiping the flour from her hands onto her apron. "Yeah, Mum." Outside, the air was crisp, biting at her cheeks. The autumn leaves were turning, painting the landscape in bursts of burnt orange and gold. As she walked toward the barn, the heavy timber structure that had stood for 3 generations, she heard the low murmur of men talking. She paused near the water trough. It was her father, Samuel, talking to Bishop Abram. Their voices were low, grave. "He is back, Samuel," the bishop said, his voice like grinding stones. "I saw him walking up the violently steep road from the bus station. He has no buggy. He carries a limp. The world chewed him up." Hannah's breath hitched. She pressed herself against the rough wood of the barn siding. "Caleb," her father whispered. "Caleb, you're there." "He is not a member of the church yet," the bishop warned. "He left. He wore the English clothes. He drove their cars. We must be careful. The young ones, they look at him and see adventure. We must show them that leaving brings only pain." Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. Caleb, the name she hadn't spoken aloud in 3 years, the boy who had carved her initials into the old oak tree by the creek before he vanished into the neon lights of the city. What? Back. Later that morning, the buggy ride to the market was tense. Hannah sat in the back, watching the cornfields blur past. When they arrived at the auction grounds, the noise was overwhelming the auctioneer. A's rapid chant, the whinnying of horses, the chatter of tourists. And then she saw him. He was standing near the edge of the corral, far away from the other young men. He was wearing old work trousers that didn't quite fit, and a plain shirt that looked threadbare. He wasn't wearing a hat. His hair, usually so neat, was a little longer than the Ordnung allowed, but it was his face that stopped Hannah cold. He looked older, tired. There was a scar above his eyebrow that hadn't been there before. He was leaning heavily on a rough-hewn walking stick. He looked at the ground, clearly feeling the weight of the eyes staring at him. He was the prodigal son, the one who tried to fly and fell. Hannah felt a pull so strong it nearly made her step out of the buggy before it stopped. She wanted to run to him. She wanted to ask him what had happened. But then a shadow fell over her. "Do not look, Hannah," her father said, his voice stern but not unkind. "He has chosen his path. We must pray for him. But we do not stare." Hannah lowered her eyes, clutching her bonnet strings. But as they passed him, just for a second, Caleb looked up. His brown eyes met hers. There was no arrogance in them, only a profound, aching sadness. And in that fleeting second, the peace of the farm, the quiet of the dough rising, and the simplicity of her life shattered. The weeks that followed were filled with the heavy labor of preparing for winter. The canning cellar needed to be filled with jars of beets, corn, and peas. The firewood needed to be stacked. But for Hannah, the work felt different. Every time she went to the creek to wash the heavy quilts, she found herself looking toward the Yoder farm, which bordered her father's land. Caleb was staying in his parents' dowdy house, the small attached house usually reserved for grandparents. The community was treating him with a cool, distant kindness. They fed him. They nodded to him. But he was not included in the Sunday singings. He was in a state of limbo, neither English nor Amish, just a man in between. One Tuesday afternoon, the sky turned a bruised purple, threatening a late-season storm. Hannah was sent to fetch the cows from the lower pasture down near the property line. The wind was picking up, whipping her skirt around her ankles. As she rounded the bend near the creek, she saw him. Caleb was struggling with a section of barbed wire fence that had come loose. He was trying to pull it taut, but his bad leg was giving out. He slipped in the mud, landing hard on one knee with a sharp intake of breath. Without thinking, Hannah dropped her switch and ran to the fence. Caleb, he looked up, startled, mud smearing his cheek. He scrambled to stand, shame flushing his face. Hannah, you shouldn't be here. Your dad, ... My dad isn't here, she said, her voice trembling. Here, let me hold the post. She grabbed the cedar post, bracing it with her shoulder. Pull it now. Caleb looked at her, hesitation warring with gratitude. He gritted his teeth, grabbed the pliers, and pulled the wire tight. He stapled it down with 3 sharp strikes. They stood there for a moment, the wind howling around them. They were close enough that she could smell the scent of rain on his skin, mixed with the faint, lingering smell of engine oil ascent from his other life. You're hurt, she said softly, looking at his leg. It's nothing, Caleb said, looking away. A reminder that the world out there doesn't care if you break. Why did you come back, Caleb? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He looked at the rushing water of the creek. Because I was thirsty, Hannah. I was thirsty for water that doesn't leave a bitter taste. I thought, ... I thought I wanted the noise. I thought I wanted the speed. But out there, ... It's just noise. No one knows your name. No one cares if you eat or starve. He looked at her then, his eyes intense. And I missed the quiet. I missed everything I left behind. Hannah knew he meant her. The air between them crackled, charged with everything they couldn't say. The bishop says, you have to repent, Hannah whispered. He says you have to confess before the church. I know, Caleb said, his voice rough. I'm trying to find the courage. It is hard, Hannah, to admit you are a fool in front of everyone you respect. It takes more courage to come back than to leave, she said firmly. Caleb reached out, his hand hovering near hers on the fence post. His fingers were calloused, trembling slightly. He didn't touch her that would be forbidden's, but the proximity was a touch in itself. Go home, Hannah, he whispered. Before the rain starts, I don't want you getting in trouble for my sake. She turned to go, but stopped. I still have it, she said, her back to him. Have what? The carved piece of wood, the bird you made me. Before you left, she didn't wait for his answer. She ran back up the hill as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, her heart pounding louder than the thunder. Winter came early that year. The snow piled high against the barn doors, and the world turned white and silent. It was a time for indoor work-mending harnesses, quilting, and reading the German Bible by the light of the kerosene lamp. It was also the time of the courtship season. Hosea Miller, the blacksmith's son, had begun to stop by the Stoltzfus farm. Josiah was a good man. Awa Study laughed loudly and had a prosperous future. Hannah's parents approved of him. He was safe. He had never left. One evening, Josiah sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee with Hannah's father. Hannah was sewing in the corner, feeling the weight of Josiah's gaze. He was talking about buying a new parcel of land. "I think it is time I settle down," Josiah said, glancing at Hannah. "I need a wife who knows how to run a good house." Hannah felt a cold dread in her stomach. She excused herself, saying she needed to check the hens. She threw her shawl over her shoulders and stepped out into the biting cold. She walked past the coop, toward the old hollow oak tree at the edge of the yard. It was their secret place. Over the last month, since that day at the creek, they had never spoken again. But they had left notes, tiny scraps of paper hidden in the hollow of the tree. It was innocent, yet strictly forbidden. A secret courtship without the blessing of the parents was a deception. She reached her hand into the hollow. Her fingers brushed paper. She pulled it out. "Hannah, the bishop spoke to me today. He said I must make my confession next Sunday. If I do, I can stay. If I stay, I want to court you the right way. But I see Josiah's buggy at your house. If your heart is with him, leave this note on the ground. If your heart is still waiting, keep it!" Hannah pressed the note to her chest, tears freezing on her lashes. The voice was like a whip crack. She spun around. Her father stood there, holding a lantern. The light cast long, jagged shadows across the snow. "Dad," she gasped, trying to hide the paper behind her back. Samuel Stoltzfus stepped forward, his face unreadable. "What do you have there?" "Nothing, Dad. Just thoughts." "Give it to me." She hesitated. To disobey her father was a sin. Slowly, with trembling hands, she held out the note. Her father took it. He didn't read it. He didn't have to. He looked at the direction of the Odor farm, then back at his daughter. The disappointment in his eyes was worse than anger. "You are meeting him. The boy who turned his back on, he has come back." "Dad, he is going to confess," Hannah cried. "He is broken, Hannah." Samuel's voice rose, startling the horses in the nearby paddock. "He has seen things, done things, that we do not even speak of. He will never be content here again. The world is in his blood now. If you marry him, he will eventually pull you away too. I will not lose my daughter to the English world." Samuel crushed the note in his fist. "You will not speak to him again. You will not go to this tree. On Sunday, after church, we will invite Josiah for dinner, and you will be pleasant. Do you understand?" "But I love him," Hannah whispered, the words hanging in the frozen air. "Love is not a feeling, Hannah," her father said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Love is a duty. It is a choice to do what is right for your soul. Caleb Yoder is a risk. Josiah is a rock. Go inside." Hannah fled to her room, burying her face in her quilt so her mother wouldn't hear her sobs. Sunday came with a sky as gray as slate. The community gathered in the miller's large barn for the service. The men sat on one side, the women on the other. The smell of straw and polished leather filled the air. Towards the end of the 3-hour service, the bishop stood up. The room went deathly still. It was time. Caleb stood up from the back bench. He limped to the front, his head bowed. He looked thin, vulnerable. He knelt on the hard wooden floor. "Brothers and sisters," Caleb's voice shook, but it was clear. "I have sinned. I left the protection of the church. I sought the pleasures of the world. I found only emptiness. I ask for your forgiveness and the grace of God to be accepted back into the fold." There was a silence that stretched for an eternity. Then the bishop reached out a hand. "Rise, Caleb. You were lost, and now you are found." The men came forward to impart the holy kiss of peace. Caleb was weeping openly now. It was a beautiful moment of restoration. But from across the aisle, Hannah watched with a breaking heart. She saw her father's face. He remained stone-faced. He did not move to greet Caleb. After the service, the separation was absolute. The families mingled, eating peanut butter spread on bread and pickles. Hannah was forced to sit next to Josiah. Josiah was kind. He brought her a cup of water. "It is good he is back," Josiah said, chewing on a pretzel. "We need hands for the harvest, but he will have a hard time finding a wife. Who wants a man who has wandered?" Hannah felt a flash of anger. "Maybe a woman who understands that wandering makes the return more meaningful," she snapped. Josiah blinked, surprised by her tone. Across the barn, Hannah saw Caleb looking at her. He looked hopeful, but then he saw her sitting with Josiah, saw her father standing guard like a sentinel. The light in Caleb's eyes died. He turned and walked out of the barn into the cold afternoon. That night, Hannah lay in bed, listening to the wind howl. A storm was coming. A blizzard. The radio in the barn, which they used only for weather reports, had warned of a massive front coming from the west. She felt a deep, terrifying certainty. Caleb was going to leave. He had seen her with Josiah. He thought he had lost her, and if he thought he had lost her, he would feel he had no anchor here. The blizzard hit 2 days later. It was a whiteout. The wind screamed like a banshee, rattling the window pane. The snow was falling so fast it was impossible to see the barn from the house. Around noon, a frantic pounding came at the door. Hannah's father opened it. It was Levi, Caleb's younger brother. He was covered in snow, gasping for air. "Samuel, you must help. The roof of the sheep shed has collapsed. Caleb is trapped inside. The beams gave way under the snow." Hannah's mother screamed. Samuel grabbed his heavy coat and hat. "I am coming. I'm coming too," Hannah cried, grabbing her shawl. "No," Samuel shouted. "It is too dangerous. He is a neighbor, Anna Argay." Her eyes fierce. "We help neighbors. That is the Amish way, is it not?" Samuel looked at his daughter. He saw a strength in her he hadn't recognized before. He didn't have time to argue. "Stay close to me." They fought their way through the blinding snow to the Yoder farm. The sheep shed was a ruin of splintered wood and snow. The sound of bleating sheep was muffled and panicked. "Caleb," Samuel roared over the wind. Here, a voice came from beneath a pile of timbers. Caleb was pinned. A heavy crossbeam had fallen across his bad leg. He was grimacing in pain, his face pale, but he was holding up a section of the roof with his shoulders, protecting 3 lambs huddled beneath him. "The beam is too heavy. Levi, Sute. We need Levorge," Samuel yelled. He looked around. "Hannah, get the pry bar from the tool shed." "Run!" Hannah didn't hesitate. She plunged through the drifts. Her lungs burning, she found the heavy iron bar and dragged it back. Samuel and Levi jammed the bar under the beam. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They heaved. The beam groaned and lifted just an inch. "Pull him, Hannah!" her father screamed. Hannah dove into the snow and debris. She grabbed Caleb by his coat collar. "Move, Caleb. Move." He groaned, dragging his injured leg free. She pulled him out, the snow swirling around them, just as the men let the beam drop back down with a sickening crunch. They dragged him into the main barn. It was warm there, smelling of hay and cows. Caleb collapsed on a bale of straw, gasping. His leg was bleeding, but he was alive. He looked up at Samuel. "The lambs?" he asked, his voice weak. "Safe," Samuel said, breathing hard. "You held the roof up for them." "They are innocent," Caleb whispered. "They didn't choose to be trapped." Samuel looked at the young man. He saw the pain in his leg, the scar on his face, but he also saw the sacrifice. Caleb hadn't run. He hadn't saved himself. He had stayed to protect the flock. Hannah was kneeling beside Caleb, pressing a clean handkerchief to his wound. She wasn't looking at her father. She was only looking at Caleb. Her hand was resting on his cheek, wiping away the dirt and sweat. "You stayed?" she whispered to Caleb. "I had nowhere else to go," he said, looking into her eyes. "My home is where you are." Samuel watched them. He looked at his daughter's hands. Gentle, capable, loving. He looked at Caleb Broca. Yes, but strong in spirit. The silence in the barn was heavy, but the anger was gone. "Hannah," Samuel said quietly. She stiffened, expecting the rebuke. She slowly stood up, placing herself between Caleb and her father. "I will not leave him, Dad. I cannot. You speak of the Ordnung, and you speak of rules. But does the Bible not speak of forgiveness? Does it not speak of love? He is not English, Dad. Look at him. He's one of us." Samuel sighed, a long, deep exhale that seemed to release years of worry. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "He has a bad leg," Samuel said gruffly. "He will not be able to plow the lower 40 acres alone." Hannah held her breath. "I suppose," Samuel continued, looking at Caleb, "he will need help. And I suppose, if he is to be my son-in-law, I cannot have him living in a dotty house forever." Caleb sat up, eyes wide. Hannah let out a sob, covering her mouth. Samuel stepped forward and extended his hand to Caleb. "You saved the lambs, Caleb. That is the sign of a good shepherd and a good husband." Caleb took the hand. "Dunka, Samuel, Donka." Narrator. The winter eventually melted into spring. The creeks swelled with water, and the daffodils pushed their yellow heads through the thawed earth. The wedding was in November, after the harvest was in. It was a simple affair, as all Amish weddings are. There were no flowers, no rings, no music. Just the community gathered in the Stoltzfus house, witnessing the union of two souls before God. Hannah wore a blue dress she had sewn herself and a fresh white apron. Caleb wore a new suit, his beard now grown out, framing a face that had lost its haunted look. When they sat at the high table, surrounded by family, Hannah looked out the window. She saw the old oak tree by the creek. The hollow was empty now. They didn't need notes anymore. Years later, if you drive down that winding lane in Holmes County, you might see a farm with a slightly crooked fence. You might see a man with a slight limp walking through the corn, and a woman bringing him a jar of iced tea. They don't have much by the world's standards. No electricity, no cars, no internet. But as the sun sets over the silos, casting long golden shadows across the land, you will see them sitting on the porch bench. He holds her hand, just sitting, just being. They say the grass is greener on the other side, out in the English world, but Hannah and Caleb know the truth. The grass is greenest where you water it with love, forgiveness, and faith. And in the quiet of the Amish country, their love grew the deepest roots of all.